I'm Christopher Roberts, and you're listening to the World is Wrong podcast.
We're here to tell you how the world is wrong. The world is wrong about
continued.
Yes, we are continuing this episode. Rather than make a 4-hour-long episode about The Believer, we decided to cut it up, and we have an interview coming now with the producer, Christopher Roberts. He also worked on Welcome to the Dollhouse. He has a very interesting career of his own. He's an old friend of mine from high school. And it's this episode. If you enjoyed the last one, it's only getting better, right, Brian?
Yeah. No, this is a great interview. Like, he has a lot of really good insight into just sort of like this world of making little movies. I actually learned a lot. Like, he has a lot of good advice, a lot of good points, and it's fun.
Yeah.
You guys have a good. You can tell you're old friends just because you guys have a good back and forth here.
And I need to pre-correct something. In the episode about Oksha, we talked about how Giancarlo Esposito had never starred in a movie. And then in this episode, I discussed the same thing with Chris Roberts as it comes up. But since then, I have found out that Giancarlo Esposito is on the poster of a major release this season. Were you aware of this, Brian?
No. What movie is it?
Well, it's not actually a movie. It's a very popular video game called Far Cry 6. And
nice.
Yesterday I was going into the Best Buy, and I saw this big movie poster, what I thought was a movie poster for a movie called Far Cry. And then I went and looked it up, and I was like, oh, geez, I'm so unhip. I don't know. Giancarlo Esposito is so much hipper than me. He's transcended movies. He's moved straight to video games. So he's doing just great. Good for you, Giancarlo. Okay, well, let's just cut to this interview with Christopher Roberts. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back next week to talk about State of Grace with your buddy Zach Carlson.
Nice.
Dear listener, if you are just discovering our podcast, you can find all of our episodes on our website at theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can also write to us at contact@theworldiswrongpodcast.com or follow us on Instagram at theworldiswrongpodcast. And now, back to the show. Christopher Roberts, welcome to The World is Wrong.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I enjoy the podcast. I enjoy you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris.
I don't agree with all of the things you think the world is wrong about, but I love that you think the world is wrong about those things and you want to tell people why.
Could you? Well,
yeah. Well, as we're recording this, you're talking this week about Wolf.
Yes,
and of course, I should clarify my statement that I don't always agree with you that the world is wrong about something, because I don't really know what the world should think about Wolf. I do remember seeing it when it came out. I do remember not liking it as many other people didn't at the time. But of course, I think about most things that I saw when I first saw them when I was that age, that I was probably too immature to understand them fully, or maybe not immature, but in a place in my life that was different from the place in the life that the filmmakers were. And so maybe it just didn't speak to me for whatever reason. I should see it again.
So you do agree with us that you should potentially see it again?
That's right. I'm not yet convinced that the world is wrong about it, but I'm open to suggestion.
Wow, that's great. I thought, that started out as a compliment, turned into something confrontational, and then you resolved the confrontation entirely on your own without me having to do anything. That's great.
Without having to blow myself up at the end,
yeah,
like some people we're going to talk about today.
Yes. So yes, we are here to talk about The Believer, but I should also say, so that listeners, they may pick up on this, but you and I have known each other for a long, long time.
A very long time.
We are old friends. We are old. We are friends.
Just shy of 40 years.
Yes. And good and old good friends. So it's a pleasure to be talking with you as always, but it's particularly exciting for me to be talking about The Believer because this is a film I've thought a lot about, And obviously you heard my interview with Henry, or my conversation with Henry.
And Henry and I had lunch about a week before that and talked about you and everything. So
okay, well, I assume you said nice things because he showed up for the interview and didn't have a bad attitude, so that was nice.
I did.
Okay, so let's.
And as you referenced in your conversation, Henry, you actually came and visited our production offices when we were shooting in the summer of 2000. You got some nice shirts out of the deal.
Did you mind that I mentioned the shirts?
Not at all. I would only clarify for all those producers and line producers and post-production supervisors who are listening out there that the shirts I gave you were not shirts that had ever been used on camera. They weren't needed for reshoots. They hadn't been worn. They were extra shirts that we had bought for the character Danny's gaggle of Nazi friends, his posse, and we had bought a number of shirts sort of in bulk in different sizes, not necessarily knowing all the people we were going to cast. So we would have a ready supply to go to for extras and things like that. And this was from the supply that wasn't ever used and couldn't be resold for, to claw back the precious pennies we needed to finish the film. So I was thrilled for you to have them.
And if I remember, most of his gaggle were big boys.
That's right. I'm not saying they were large, Andras. I'm saying they were in charge.
You must have bought some small or medium shirts, and at the time, that's what I was looking for, and you had them to spare. So
yeah,
on the off chance you got a runty Nazi show up at the compound or something, you need to.
I also remember, by the way, that you were one of the few people. And this gets into some of the elements of our interview or our conversation today. You were one of the few people to whom I described the plot of The Believer, and you did not think, geez, that's weird. Why are you doing that? I think you heard the story and you understood intuitively that it was interesting and compelling and it resonated with you immediately. And actually, that is one thing I did want to talk about, which is that, is it all right if I just jump right in?
Yeah.
So one thing that I always thought was interesting about The Believer, look, when you read a script as a producer, or as a prospective producer, as you're imagining you might produce something, of course, you're looking for things that resonate with you. You're looking for things that are unusual, things that have not been said before or have not been said in the way that they're being said in the script. And, you're looking to be excited and surprised, right? Like anyone. So, of course, you read a script about a young Jewish man who becomes a neo-Nazi skinhead. That's going to catch your attention as being original and unusual. But what I loved about that script is something that I didn't even realize at first that I loved. And it was how organic and natural everything that unfolded in the script seemed to me. So once you've decided that you're producing a movie like that and you go around and you're shopping it to people, and I don't necessarily mean for financing, because when Henry and I started working together, the financing was more or less secure. He was going to invest in it, and a company here in Los Angeles was going to invest in it. And we felt like we had enough to make the movie. But I did have to hire people to shoot the film, to production design the film, to cast the film, to act in the film. And, so as I began trying to assemble a creative team, I would definitely run into people who were friends of mine, people with whom I'd worked before, who I trusted very much, and I'd give them the script, and they would just not understand the movie. They would not understand why I was making the movie. They thought, like, did I owe somebody a favor? What was wrong with me that I wanted to make this movie? There were a number of people who, I guess what you'd say colloquially is, they didn't get it. And I began to think, gee, am I weird that I think this is good? But every time I read it, I didn't think the film was weird. I didn't think it was strange. I didn't think it was uncomfortable. I just thought everything flowed organically from the characters and from the ideas in the script. And it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to me. And that is something you're definitely prizing as a producer, when a world is different and unusual and catches people off guard and yet seems totally natural to you.
But this wasn't your first foray into Nazi-themed film. I did not know this. See, this is the great thing about researching your friend. I went on IMDb and did a little bit more research than I have in the past, and I saw this film Anima that you produced the year before, or a few years before.
Yeah,
The Believer?
just a couple years before. Yeah, Anima. Yes, Craig Richardson, writer and director, wonderful fellow, an artist based in Rhode Island. So Anima is a film about a documentary filmmaker who imagines that he is going to uncover a secret Nazi in Rhode Island, although I'm not sure I can't remember if that's made explicit in the film, and instead discovers something very different, really the opposite of what he thinks he's going to find, and stumbles onto a very beautiful and strange love story and a story of estrangement between a father and a son. And Nazis are definitely in the background and lurking, but they are not front and center, despite the protagonist's false belief that they will be. And actually, that's an interesting thing as I describe it. The character played by Bray Poor, who's a wonderful actor who played the lead in that movie, one of the leads. I don't know if he's the protagonist. He's the person through whom we experience the movie, but in some ways he's the antagonist because he's so full of himself and believes that something is going to turn out to be true that isn't true, and he has to have a bit of a comeuppance. But anyhow. But yeah, so I'm a Jew, and even though my name is Chris Roberts, I was, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and a lot of their family members perished. And but I was raised like, I don't know about you and our generation of young Jewish people, but I guess we're not young anymore. But when we were young, I was raised in a virulently atheist household on both my mother's side and my father's side. And we didn't really talk about being Jewish, although I knew we were Jewish. So much so that, as I like to joke, although this is true, that when my wife and I told both of our families that we were having a Jewish wedding, they wondered where they had gone wrong. So I suppose themes of Judaism, themes of Nazism, themes of the Holocaust, themes of persecution, they felt very familiar to me. They were, I don't want to say they were mother's milk exactly, but they didn't scare me, or they neither scared me nor did I find them excessively deep and dark. They were just sort of the wallpaper of my childhood in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the line that jumps out to me from the film over and over again, and it's said sarcastically, but I think Danny says, so what? So Hitler's the chief rabbi now?
Yeah.
And I feel like, my experience is different than yours, but similar in that I'm a Jew with a name that doesn't sound Jewish who grew up in a situation that was really separate from what people would associate with the Jewish community. And so for me, a lot of my Judaism is wrapped up in learning about the Holocaust and sort of realizing at a young age, oh, that could happen to me. And so in a way, yeah, Hitler is the chief rabbi. Did that line did that hit you in a particular way, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely felt that I grew up in an environment in which to be Jewish was to think obsessively about Nazis and the Holocaust. And so, and by the way, I am not saying that all Jews grow up like that. I mean, mercifully, I think maybe 90% of Jews don't grow up like that. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying it's how I grew up.
Yeah.
And so because I didn't grow up with a positive experience of the religion, because we weren't religious, I didn't grow up with, life-affirming values of Judaism. I just grew up with the sense of to be a Jew is to be hunted by Hitler. And so Hitler did feel like the chief rabbi in my life for a long time. I want to say that that's not true anymore. I am a pretty observant Jew now, and someone who finds a great deal of life-affirming values from my Jewish experience. And by the way, I think the movie gave that gift to me. While it is true that I had a Jewish wedding before the movie, I was still involved in my. I mean, I was moving towards my Jewish identity in a lot of ways, in affirmative ways, in ways in which Hitler would not be my chief rabbi. But working on this movie really solidified that for me and catalyzed my development into a much more observant and thoughtful and giving Jew. And I even had an adult bar mitzvah afterwards.
I need one of those. That's
go and get yourself one, Andras. Yeah, it's awesome.
I don't know. I mean, yes, and
as my rabbi explained to me, in Jewish law, and I might be butchering this, you become bar bat mitzvah when you turn, 13 or 12. So the bar bat mitzvah ritual is really just the ritual. You already are a bar mitzvah. You're a Jewish man. and you're part of the Jewish community if that's something that you want to be. And some might say you are that whether you want to be or not. But I'm not your rabbi, so that's not for me to say. But the ritual itself is just a public expression of that. It's not the thing that makes you bar mitzvah. It's just an added public ceremony that shares that with your larger community. So
I'm trying to. Yeah.
So come on in. What I'm trying to say, Andras, is that come on in. The water's fine.
Oh well, thank you. Well, we can, and when it's time for my interview, we can explore all of the reasons that I'm hemming and hawing about that. But we're here to talk about you in this film, and I do want to get into. Well, I want to get into talking about the film, but I also want to highlight one other aspect of your career, because when I was talking with Brian about Brian, my co-host, about the other things you worked on, I mentioned Welcome to the Dollhouse, and he's like, wow, this guy just likes these films that are funny but not.
Yeah.
What was your role on Welcome to the Dollhouse?
So in Welcome to the Dollhouse, my role was awesome. That was the first film I ever worked on, and I was the first hire on the film outside of the producers themselves. My friend Ted Skillman, who I'd gone to college with, was producing that film with Jason Cleo and Joanna Vicente, and I was hired to be the location manager. And this was in New York City in the summer or the spring, really, of 1994. And I really felt pleased that my friend Ted had faith in me to do that, because it seemed like a very important job. I didn't know everything that it entailed. I did realize later that he only hired me because I had a car. And a car was really necessary to getting to suburban New Jersey, where the film was going to be shot. And I say that with love because, Ted is one of my best friends to this day. In fact, I had dinner with him last night. But I do know now that he only hired me for my Mazda 323. And so I would drive around New Jersey with Todd Solondz every day for, it felt like weeks or months on end. I'm sure it wasn't that long. And we looked at high schools and schools and elementary schools and people's houses and shopping malls, looking for all the places that were going to represent the world of Don Wiener in his mind. And I just thought that was a spectacular. Sorry, did you get that? Because I had a call waiting there for a second.
No, I got it. Yeah.
So I just thought it was a spectacular experience, because unbeknownst to me, that's the best way to get involved in filmmaking, because to work in locations, first of all, you have to work closely with the director and the producers. You then come to understand, the production mechanics of making a film and what locations mean. And I'm talking about when you're making an indie film where you're shooting on location and not in the studio. And also, you then, when you're on set, you're responsible for helping every department do what they have to do well. So you learn what the sound department needs, because you're the guy who goes to figure out how to shut off a refrigerator or ask a construction crew to stop backing up a truck, in the middle of their workday. You're the guy who has to find a space for the costume department to set up and for the makeup department to set up. You're the person who figures out where the food is going to be and how you're going to feed the crew. You're the person who figures out where the second meal is going to come from when you start running late. At least I was on Dollhouse. And so it was an incredible crash course in every aspect of film production, and an incredible opportunity to learn from a great director and writer, Todd, because I just spent so much time learning from him what he was looking for and how to translate the words he had written into things in real life that would represent what he was looking for. And that was a great experience. And I stayed on, and I was a post-production supervisor and a kind of unit producer. And I eventually was a kind of a producer on the film, not a named producer, because it eventually became a Producers Guild film, and I couldn't do that. But I certainly was involved. And actually, when The Believer won Sundance, and I came home afterwards, the first voicemail on my, then answering machine was Todd congratulating me. So that was really great. So, but it was a good film. And again, another script where I read it and other people thought this is creepy and weird. And I thought this just seems like the most natural thing in the world to me.
That's why we're friends, Chris. That's another one of those films that when I watched it, I'll tell you just quickly, my reaction to that film was there was this anger I'd been feeling ever since the end of The Breakfast Club. Like I liked The Breakfast Club, like everyone liked The Breakfast Club, but the being in high school at the time, that ending got me so angry when they're all friends, and I was like, that's never fucking going to happen. And I stuffed it down and whatever, I got over it, whatever, it's just a movie. But when when we got to the end of Welcome to the Dollhouse, like all of that came rushing out. I was like, okay, that's the truth. And
yeah, what's another thing that's amazing about Welcome to the Dollhouse? Well, first of all, thank you, and I mean, obviously, all the credit for that goes to Todd. But I certainly feel honored to have worked on it. The thing that's amazing about Welcome to the Dollhouse is when people learn that I've worked on that film and they want to talk to me about it, everybody thinks that they were Wiener Dog. Like the people who were cheerleaders in high school think they were Wiener Dog. People who were the quarterback think they were Wiener Dog. The people who were Wiener Dog think they were Wiener Dog. And so while it is true that there were sides in high school and middle school, and there was good and there was evil, it is remarkable how many of the people that you and I might look back on and think were on the wrong side of history in those times, still think that they were the aggrieved party. I mean, it's just something about the verbal and emotional violence of that time in my life and perhaps in your life. It was so intense, and people really feel it, but it seems to have really affected everybody. Even the people who were, in my view, the perpetrators of it, look back and think they were the victims of it, and maybe they were. I don't know. I also think, happily, my children, who are all older now, I don't think that was their experience. So maybe things have improved.
Well, that makes me both happy and jealous. But that's it is a good thing. It is a very good thing. And I think I do feel like films like Welcome to the Dollhouse contributed to that, because for exactly what you're talking about. I think that you don't bully if you haven't been bullied. And I guess that means that those of us who have been bullied have to always be on the lookout for for repeating that pattern. But then something about, I don't know, that's what I'm saying, that something about that film broke that John Hughesian lie that it's all going to work out. And I guess the fact you're saying that so many people have responded to it that way makes me think, oh, well, those are the people who have grown up to be bullies against bullying on school boards. And maybe that's a good thing. I mean, it's a good place to put that energy if you're doing it. And I mean, it can be a good place to put that energy. But, I'm looking at it from a world is wrong point of view. There's no point at which this all is resolved and everything's cool. And that's why I really love the end of Welcome to the Dollhouse, and why I love The Believer. So let's get back. So now, there is one other point here. Was this around the time that you were working with David Mamet's theater company?
No, this is after. I worked for the Atlantic Theater Company in 91 and 92. Maybe a little bit 93. I think just 91 and 92. And that's a theater company in New York City that was founded by pupils of David Mamet, although Mamet and William H. Macy and Felicity Huffman were very involved at the beginning, and she was one of the students there. But that came later. But I will say it was David Mamet. I mentioned earlier that I was on my path to my own Judaism. That was based on reading the book Writing in Restaurants and some other things by Mamet when I was just graduating, had left college and was driving around the country and figuring out who I was. So, thinking I knew who I was, but not realizing quite how little I actually knew.
So you read that, and then how did you end up with the Atlantic?
Well, I was living and working in New York City, and they had a job opening for a general manager, and I had some experience that I thought would be relevant, and I applied, and I got the job, and I did the job, and I must say I was very, very bad at it. And after a year or year and a half, they asked me to leave, although we all stayed friends. I just wasn't cut out for that job. I was too young and immature to know how much I didn't know, and I was just not good at it. but so be it. And then the person who replaced me was really awesome at the job, and they went on to great things.
Who was that?
A guy named Jeff Solis, who was much more experienced and shrewder than I about all things running a theater company.
And do you have any?
But I mean, I will say I learned a lot from Atlantic, and when I started my own theater company, called the Adobe Theater Company, which was very successful. So I became good at those things, but I was not when I was at Oakland.
Is there any particular story from your time there, whether it's about something excellent that you saw or some, I don't know, egregiously unprofessional thing you did?
At the Atlantic Theater Company?
Yeah.
Well, I did accidentally hit David Mamet in the head with a volleyball during a July 4th picnic at William H. Macy's house. So that was pretty awesome. That was the first time I'd met him in person. And then, you know, but no, I mean, I got to work there on a play called Distant Fires that starred, among others, Giancarlo Esposito, who was a young actor at that time. And he was just fantastic to work with, and just the nicest person in the world. And that was a really great experience. I mean, I had other great experiences there. I don't. That's just one that comes to mind.
No, go on.
No, that's fine.
Well, I was just going to say I just
didn't want to say like I had that great experience and nothing else. It's just like, among other things, I got to see Giancarlo Esposito every night for a couple months, and that was pretty awesome.
Well, I love that you highlighted
and then
that.
then he had to leave, by the way, and was replaced by a young actor named Isaiah Washington, who was also fantastic, who also later went on to great success.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing I was thinking about was, you mentioned Giancarlo Esposito, and he just came up because we did an episode about Okja, the Bong Joon-ho film.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I like that film.
And
weird film.
Yeah.
The world just might be wrong about that one.
Yeah. I think it is. Well, we'll see. You check out our podcast and you see if we get it right, how the world is wrong about it. But one of the things that we mentioned of how the world is wrong, one of the great tragic and horrifying things about watching this film was when I realized that I don't think Giancarlo Esposito has ever been the star of a movie. Has he ever? Like, he's been he's been a star in TV series, and this is not like I think he's probably doing just fine, but it is one of those odd things that at no point has a producer, I'm not saying you, but a producer like yourself, a young, at that time, independent producer or someone along the way didn't say, hey, maybe we should make a Death of a Salesman with this guy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll have to go on IMDb or something and convince myself that it's true that he's never been the lead in something.
He's been
but
the
I'll take
heavy.
your word for it.
He's been I went through and there was nothing that jumped out. I mean, he has a massive catalog, but or a massive resume. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting synchronicity because of all the people for you to mention. We were just singing his praises. So maybe it's coming. Maybe it's in the works. Maybe.
Well, I thought then, and again, this was 30 years ago. He was an uncommonly Zen personality, or so it seemed. And maybe he had the good sense to realize that pursuing being a quote unquote movie star was not where it was at for him. Not in terms of not having the opportunities, just that there were more interesting things creatively and personally to do than that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could be, it's not, it might not just be that no casting director or producer had the nerve or the common sense to cast him, but that he sought out roles and opportunities that would, keep him in character roles and meaningful, sort of scene stealing roles, but not always the lead. Because of course, as you know, the lead is often, and this is not true of The Believer, but the lead is often the least interesting person in a movie.
Yes. As I know very well. Okay, now let's get back to The Believer. So when did you come to the production?
Well, I came to the production pretty early. Henry had a script and he knew he was going to shoot this thing. And he knew he wanted to try to shoot it in the year 2000, if at all possible. There was going to be a break in his schedule. He's very busy, was then and still is very busy writer. And Henry and I actually lived in the same apartment building. And, Dollhouse had been out and had done very well. And that had given me some professional opportunities that were really great. And we got to chatting, I don't know if it was in the elevator, but like on the street one day. And he said, "Oh, you produce?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you know these people?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I've worked with these people. Do you know these people?" And just turned out we sort of knew people in common. He said, "Well, I've got a script." And of course, that is both catnip to any producer's ears and also a little bit of dread when your neighbor tells you he's got a script.
Right.
But I said, great. And he showed me the script and I was like, oh shit, this is a good script. Didn't know. And I mean, I will say that when I chatted with him and he said he had a script, I'm not sure I knew how successful a writer he had been. He was just my upstairs neighbor, Henry. So I wasn't prepared for how good the script was going to be. And the script was really good. And it seemed completely crazy to think about producing a movie with my upstairs neighbor. So many things can go wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But Henry and I just seemed very simpatico in a lot of ways. And I just thought this script is too good I'll move out of the building if I have to, but the script is too good to say no to. I was willing to give up my neighborliness to work on that film. And so then, I told him all the reasons why I thought I would do a good job in producing the film and why he could trust me to both have my own ideas that would benefit his and to advocate for his vision and not get in his way. And I guess he was persuaded by that. And we went to California and we met the people who were putting up some of the money as well. And they seemed persuaded by everything that we wanted to do. And we got to the business then of sort of assembling a creative team. And we would talk about different cinematographers. We would talk about the kinds of people who could, locations and so on and so forth. And so I brought to him a woman named Susan Block to be the production designer, who had been the production designer on Welcome to the Dollhouse. We had talked to a couple of cinematographers, but one person I knew through my friend Ted, who had produced Welcome to the Dollhouse so brilliantly. Ted had produced an earlier film called River of Grass, which was Kelly Reichardt's first film, and the cinematographer behind that was Jim Deneau. And so through Ted, I got to know Jim Deneau, and I introduced Jim and Henry, and they got on like a house on fire. And so when you had a great cinematographer and you had a great production designer, a great script, you're very well along the way. Where I had a little more trouble finding someone was a casting director. I knew Adrienne Stern, but I knew her primarily through her work in New York theater. I wasn't so sure that she wanted to do a film. And so I went first to people who had worked on films, independent films, and people I'd gone to college with and knew. And that is where I really found some friends who were amazing people, and I like them, but they did not get the script and didn't feel like they could recruit a great cast for the film, and were really worried that I was never going to find a cast because I wasn't going to find people who wanted to say those words and do those things. Mm-hmm. And then I was sort of talking about my problem with Adrienne, and she's like, well, I can do a film. It's like, great, you can do a film. And Adrienne was a gateway to so many talented people in New York. And we also then came out to Los Angeles to do casting, and that's where we met Ryan. And I know Henry told you that story. There is one other sort of amusing anecdote about the casting of Ryan, which is that we were in Los Angeles for at least a full week, and we had seen, as Henry said, 100 people, and Ryan was the 99th. I would have said Ryan was the 100th, but I think he's right. He was the 99th. And on the day that Ryan came in, there were a couple of days towards the end of the casting process where Adrienne had an unavoidable conflict and could not be at the casting sessions with us. I mean, she had arranged them and found the actors, but she couldn't actually be there. And so my wife, who was about 5 months pregnant at the time with our first child, came and ran the camera. And I was reading lines and Henry was directing, and my wife was there. And so, Ryan came in and he did those scenes, and the scenes he did, the big one was the scene with Guy Daniels in the coffee shop where he talks about Jewish women and oral sex and why the Jews are perverted and so on and so forth. And, it's filled with, vile anti-Semitic and, sexually vulgar language and all this. And he does the scene and does it a couple of times and does some other scenes that are equally vile. And at the end of it, he goes to my wife, not knowing that it's my wife, behind the camera, and says, "I'm so sorry you had to hear all that." And she says, "Oh, don't worry, I've been hearing it all day." And he looked at her very sincerely and said, "Well, you shouldn't have to." and then he left. And then Henry and I went and got a burrito, and we were like, "He was really good, but he can't possibly be in our movie, can he?" And he was like, "I don't know, he's really good." I was like, "But he's blonde, he's blue-eyed, he's Mormon, he's Canadian, he's, a good 8 years younger than what we're looking for." And we just sort of were stuck on the idea that he was completely wrong for the role in every way, except for being far and away the best actor we had seen doing the role, and he was so interesting and so different. And I mean, Henry, I think, described to you how Ryan's audition stuck with him and stuck with me too. I will admit, I took much more convincing than Henry that Ryan could do it. Not because he wasn't talented, but because I had the very cynical. I just was too naive. I just didn't like. He didn't look enough like the part to me, and I wasn't trusting enough of hair and makeup and his own ability to.
Sorry, could you say that again? My apologies.
Sorry,
I couldn't hear what you said.
my watch apparently thinks that I summoned. Anyhow, yeah, I was.
I think that was like, that felt like it's like karma, like to have a producer here admitting that they were wrong. I think every director who's listening, they're just like, just say it again so I could cry a little more.
No, I was wrong, and I said to Henry, something really moronic in the hallway of our apartment after we got our building after we got back to New York, like. Yes, he's the best actor, but do we need the best actor? and Henry just looked at me like, maybe not. I don't know. And I'm sure he was just thinking like, oh, good Lord, my producer's a moron. But no. And then Ryan did a tape where he darkened his hair and did some other things. And I, like Henry, as I watched the audition tapes over and over again, I was really mesmerized by Ryan, and I was persuaded all along that he would be incredible. I just was worried about the believability of him in the role, not about his talent.
This is something I talked about a little bit with Henry. Since then, it's come out in the news even more. So we're definitely zeitgeisty in that way. This whole thing of this idea of Jew facing as being, similar to. I feel like it raises a lot of interesting questions, and the fact that you had to deal with it in the casting of this, I think that I would have been the same. I think I am still the same way. There's still a part of me that feels like it sucks that the guy who's playing this character isn't Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm with you when you made the right decision, because it's fucking Ryan Gosling. We wouldn't be talking about it probably if it weren't for the fact that. If James Dean walks in, okay, I think James Dean can be Jewish.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say, Ryan was also, just for me personally, though he was not a movie star when he worked on the film, that was my first experience of somebody who had that kind of particular movie star charisma. When I made The Believer, I had been working in film for about, 6 years. I had been producing theater in New York and off Broadway for about, 9 years. So, I'd worked with a lot of actors, and I loved actors. I mean, I grew up wanting to be an actor and acting a lot in high school with you and doing other things.
You were very good.
Although, thank you very much. But that was not a good career choice for me, and I was not as talented as a lot of people like you and those people. And, but I did think I had the very stubborn New Yorker view that acting is a craft, that people have to learn that craft, that you're born with a greater or lesser talent for it, but that all actors are good and are capable, with the right direction and the right writing and the right, lighting and so on and so forth, of giving a great performance, and that you can coax that out of them. And I will say, Ryan was my first experience like, oh, no, he's got something that you're just born with. And it had nothing to do with Henry's writing and directing, although Henry's writing and directing brought out the best in him. But he brought with him so much talent, but also so much personality and charisma. Nobody who worked on that movie did not think that Ryan was going to be a big star.
And
I mean, and I'm not. And by the way, that sounds like a cliched and silly thing to say.
No.
And he was also a lovely and wonderful human being, and I trust that he still is today. But nobody. I guess what I should say is nobody thought, if he wants this, it is his for the taking. If he wants to do great things in film, it seemed very clear that was going to be available to him. And he did want that, and he wanted to do a lot of things that are dark and difficult and challenging, like Blue Valentine and titles that are just escaping me because I'm having a senior moment, but all the amazing stuff he's done. Anyhow, it was just that was fun. just being around somebody who was so young. He was 19. He had his 20th birthday on set. We all got him, a cake and a gift, and just thinking like, geez, this kid really, he's the world. He can do whatever he wants, if he wants it. So that was fun. I'm very happy for him.
Do you remember that at the time I was traveling through New York with my band, and you said,
yeah.
"Oh, I know this young guy. He's thinking he wants to talk. He wants to do something with music. He's the actor in this film. He was in the Mickey Mouse Club." You told me, and he's trying to figure out what he wants to do as a musician. And yes. I don't, like, in my mind, I've decided not to remember if you said, "I want to connect you guys to talk." I feel like in my mind, you just said, "Would you have any advice for him?" And I gave you some advice, but
which I passed on. Yes, no, I do remember, and
you didn't just. To be clear, I didn't turn down a chance to get together and talk songwriting with Ryan Gosling in 2001. Did I?
You did not. Your schedules were not compatible. He was shooting every day, and you were playing every night.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank God. Okay. I mean, it would have been nice. But,
yeah.
Yeah. That's one less thing.
You and I don't know if you remember this. You and I even conceived of a story idea, which was of a pop idol, in a teen band who wants to become an indie singer-songwriter and go out on the road. Basically somebody who was like Justin Timberlake who wanted to become somebody like Andras Jones. So
basically the Pete Yorn story.
Just so.
Okay, sorry.
Moving right along. But I think your original question was how I got involved. So we got involved. We founded a great creative team. We had remarkable people working with us. On the set. I mean, again, when you make a movie, everything has to go right, or enough things have to go right that they overcome the things go wrong. So we had, Jim Deneau, incredible shooter who gave the film an incredible look. Susan Block, who did a great job designing it. Andrew Yo, who found great locations all around the 5 boroughs. Susan Hoffman, who was also a producer, who Henry described in his interview with you, who I think Susan really made sure that our film was a movie, if you know what I mean. I think Henry and I had the New York gritty street cred that we brought to the movie, and the sort of the verisimilitude of the thing. And Susan was the one who really brilliantly kept an eye on the character arc and the other important things. I mean, she was the one who really reminded us, we're making a movie. There's got to be a first act and a second act and a third act. There's got to be a protagonist with some stated goals that get thwarted. And like Henry described, he's got to lose sometimes. He's got to transform. And I think, among her many gifts, Susan made sure that Henry really kept his eye on some of the big story arc, where I think I was much more focused on a lot of the day-to-day, this scene, that scene, great performances, making sure the camera's got the right. Well, I didn't have to make sure the camera had the right lenses. Jim did that, but making sure that the crew had what they needed to tell the story that they wanted to tell. But that ended up, I think, being a good combination. I learned a lot from her, and that was great. And then I also want to credit, because I never get enough credit, the editors, Mayan Lowe and Lee Percy. And it was Susan who brought in Lee Percy when we were a little bit lost in the editing room. And Lee, in many ways, is the difference between the film being good and being great. He found all of the greatness within it that we were putting out there, but the souffle wasn't rising until Lee got in there with Henry, and they really found it. And then Joel Diamond, oh my God, Joel's music is so great. I worked with Joel on Welcome to the Dollhouse, and then I want to give a big shout out to Susanna Perich, who was the music supervisor, who worked with Joel on his compositions and found the right way to slot them in. And it's not enough to score a movie brilliantly. It's when to use the score, at what volume, and how to use instrumentation and the percussive nature of instrumentation to augment. So in many movies you're using it to augment the mood, the atmosphere, to sort of clue in the audience what to feel. In so many ways, Susanna's genius and Joel's genius was finding ways to use the music to punctuate the words and to let the internal thought process of Danny come out in some ways. Do you know what I mean? The music, what Joel wrote was very staccato, was very percussive in a lot of places, was very moody, but was really giving color and texture to a lot of the talking in the movie, not just the thinking. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I thought the use of music in the movie was one of the things I'm most proud of, and one of the most unusual elements of the movie, I think. And all, by the way, recorded by Joel alone in a room at the Chelsea Hotel, which I'm also very proud of.
That's pretty great. That's pretty great. Now, was Ryan Gosling the first actor hired, or was there? Did you need to get a name in there? Were Billy Zane and Theresa Russell the reason you got money?
Yeah, Billy Zane and Theresa. Well, they aren't the reason we got money, but they're the reason I think they're part of the reasons we could keep the money. I mean, we were going to get the money, but we had to agree to find some names that would be helpful to selling the film in international territories. Of course, the business of selling movies then was very different from what it is today. Mm-hmm. So Ryan, in my memory, was the first actor cast, although that's going back 20 years. And then, and then Theresa and Billy. And Summer, of course, I think Henry already wrote the part for Summer. Mm-hmm. And so while she hadn't, I don't think, technically been cast ahead of Ryan, there was no doubt that that's who we wanted. And we were very fortunate that she could do it then.
Now, I have another casting question. I have two sort of random, just personal casting questions. First is... Now, there was some confusion in my discussion with Henry about Natasha Leggero showing
mm-hmm.
up in the film. But you can clear that up for us?
Well, yeah. So you see, so she's the waitress in the scene between Danny Balin and Guy Daniels in the coffee shop where Guy confronts Danny about the fact that he's a bar mitzvah Jew from, Brooklyn. And she is the one serving the coffee, and she has a few great cutaway expressions when she's pouring coffee for them, and Ryan is saying something suitably outrageous about Jewish women or about Jews. And my
not just
memory,
Jews. In that one, he goes for everyone.
He goes for everyone, yeah. So she had to play, the shocked waitress, and I think there are a few great cutaways of her shocked expressions. In my memory, and I could be wrong about this, Natasha either came to us because she was friends with the actor Dean Strober, who was playing the part of Ryan's former childhood friend, the friend who's going to JTS, where they have mm-hmm. and Danny sneers mm-hmm. in the bookstore, when he hears about this. And I believe that Dean is the one who had Natasha come and play they were friends or something. Or she was on set and it came out through conversation with her that she was friends with Dean. So I might not remember. She may have just been friends with Adrian. But yeah, she was awesome. I mean, I remember her really vividly. And in fact, when she later became a famous comedian, I was like, that's so weird. I did not. I mean, you spend a day on set with somebody, you don't learn that their great wish in life is to become a comedian. So I did not know that was her thing, and maybe at that time she didn't know that was her thing either. But I certainly remember her being a wonderful presence on set. I want to say also this set, just almost every day, had a really warm and convivial atmosphere, despite the fact that the material, or maybe because of the fact that the material was so dark and difficult. I've talked a lot about how people were weirded out by the script, but everybody who worked on it thought they were doing something really interesting and special. Or at least I hope that's how they felt.
It certainly.
And so the mood on set every day was pretty good. I mean, there were days that were hellish, because always on movie sets there are days that are hellish, days where you're not getting the scene or not getting the shot, or some production element is not cooperating, or someone's late or something. But so I don't want to say that every day was bliss, but for the most part,
Natasha's day was bliss.
Well, that was a good day. I mean, Henry was great on that day. I mean, Ryan was so good and AD was so good. And yeah, that was a scene that could have gone less well than it did, but they were just both fantastic. And a lot of that, I mean, the lion's share of that is for them, but also, I mean, Henry and Jim really got great performance out of them. So
I gotta say, my favorite part I've watched that scene over and over now because I had to clip it for what we post on Instagram. My favorite part of that scene is the reaction shots. Just the people in the table behind, trying not to listen and being sort of looking at each other. It's very, your background actors are doing some some very subtle work there that is not that completely sells the whole feeling. It's really, pretty great.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah. A lot of that also, by the way, comes from the fact that, I think Henry did a great job always in reminding us that the movie was funny. And I know that's something that you all talked about, the ways in which the movie is blackly comic or just comic. And I think that Henry really, in the pre-production process, when we do very long, table reads and pre-production reads, I think, everybody got it that the movie had very serious, needless to say, extremely serious themes. It ends tragically. It's a very, it's got a lot of dark elements, but that we weren't there to play the darkness. The darkness was something that emerged sort of organically out of the circumstances of the characters and the actions that they undertake. But that at the same time, there was also wit and, the comedy of life, of human existence was present in a lot of the stuff as well. In the paradoxes of the character and the ironies of the things he pursued and the way we approached it. We tried not to be self-serious about any of it. We tried to keep a very light touch and let the drama of the action speak for itself. And I think that kept a good mood on set, but it also meant that the parts of the movie that are deeply, deeply funny, it let them have the oxygen they needed to be funny. Although, I know not everybody sees the movie and sees the humor in it.
Yeah, I don't think the posters really help with that.
Well, Henry and I did not design the posters, needless to say.
The posters are
we had an idea. I think I told
scary. They make it look like this is a Nazi movie instead of this is a Jewish movie.
Yeah, well, American History X had come out, and I think there was a thought that we wanted to position ourselves maybe as an even better American History X with another, riveting lead performance of a scary skinhead who, nonetheless, you can't take your eyes off of.
I wish I could have been in that meeting to argue the alternate on that, which is you want to be for everyone who just didn't who heard that they should see American History X, but they heard about scenes in it that they were like, I can never watch that movie. This is for you. This is the nice American History X, the funny American. Anyway, sorry, they didn't do that. Did you have an idea of did I dream this, or did you tell me that there was an alternate idea for the poster?
Well, Henry and I were trying to come up with a tagline for the movie that would subtly, perhaps, communicate some of our thoughts about the film. And the one idea we had is that the tagline should be something like, knock, knock, who's there? And just leave it at that.
The believer.
Because, like Henry said to you, I mean, you tell people you're making a movie about a Jewish Nazi, people laugh, it's funny. Yeah. And they don't yet know whether you're making a Mel Brooks movie or, American History X, but, you try to leave some ambiguity about that and let them figure it out for themselves. And when the film premiered at Sundance, we did say, I mean, Henry did some of the intros, I did some of the intros, and we'd say, if you feel like laughing, laugh. It's okay. We won't be offended.
You get extra Jewish when you're telling people in Utah that it's okay to laugh at a movie about Nazis. You really you bring it in.
Well, I'm sorry to say that when you're at Sundance, you're barely talking to people in Utah because everybody who comes, talk about replacement theory.
Yes.
Park City becomes very different in its organization. I mean, there are a lot of people who do come from the local community, and they're awesome and really supportive. I would think it would be very unpleasant to be a native of Park City and to have lived through the entire Sundance experience, but that's for other people to worry about. So.
Yeah, so there is another question I have about the casting, which is just knowing you and watching it. A lot of the men in the film in this film that aren't Ryan Gosling look like you.
Zig Leibowitz.
Well, the teacher.
Many people mistakenly think that I am playing the teacher, but that's actually a wonderful actor named Zig Leibowitz, who then was a production executive for. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. But he worked in New York and then he was in LA. Anyhow, a wonderful guy. and so that's Sig Leibowitz and Dean Strober, who plays the friend who's going to JTS.
Yes.
And
and
then
a little
Judah.
bit Judah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Judah. Who, yeah.
Is that the casting director sort of like sucking up to you and being like, okay, well, we're gonna. If we give
I think
producer
you're
more
backing into a different trope, which is that we all look alike.
No.
You know, these young Jewish guys, they all look alike.
No, they don't. We don't.
They don't. Yeah, they're a broad range of people.
But not in your movie. In your movie, the ideal Jewish man looks like Chris Roberts.
My only role in the movie is that of the alarmed temple goer. In the scene where Danny is ordering everybody to get out, and Eilzabeth Reaser's character and Dean's character and I are all looking confused about what to do, and I'm standing with them, looking shocked and in my full Hebraic, stubble and all that.
Oh, so, I got to look for that. I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Yes. No, it's wonderful to be able to go to cocktail parties and say, well, I did act with Ryan Gosling in a film once.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then you tell them what the film is, and they're like, oh, that one. What else have you worked on? Welcome to the Dollhouse.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. What's with this dark and strange Roberts?
I think The Believer, by the way, is a movie. Many people tell me they've seen it, and I don't believe them. It's just not that many people saw it. I mean, that's what The World is Wrong about. It's not that they didn't. It's not that the world didn't appreciate the movie. The movie received great critical acclaim, won a lot of awards, was well reviewed, and has made a huge impression for Ryan professionally. But I don't actually think a lot of people saw it, unfortunately, and that is, of course, a regret of mine. Although it is also 20 years later, we're still talking about the movie. You're talking about it, but not you, only you. A lot of people talk about it, and that's a nice thing.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question because I saw Noise since talking with Henry. You didn't work on Noise.
I did not.
But have you seen it?
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, reading up on it, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It has the same kind of sense of humor. I think I like The Believer. If I had to pick one, I like The Believer more. The Believer just has a cohesive something. But I really, really did like Noise. It's a really weird film in all the ways that I love.
And Susan Hoffman produced that, and everybody who's listening to this podcast should go see Noise.
Yes, it's
a really good movie, and support Henry.
I'm glad I sought it out. But when I was researching it, I saw that it was supposed to be part of a Fanatics trilogy, The Believer, Noise, and then something else. And then when I was talking with Henry, he made it pretty clear that he's not directing any more movies. And he said something that when he said it, I didn't push back, but then afterwards I felt like maybe I should have, because he's like, well, I just don't think I'm a good, I know what I'm good at. I'm a good writer. I'm not a good director. And
well, I think what he said was, I'm a better writer than I'm a director. And I don't think he said he's not a good director, but
I think the impression I had was not like, yeah, Woody Allen's maybe a better writer than he is a director too, but he still does it. But I felt like he was saying, this is something I'm not doing anymore because I just don't think I'm good at it. And when someone says that, like I've said that to people, and I don't want them to then start being my coach or something. I'm like, okay, yeah, you don't want to dance, don't dance, But I was curious, and maybe you've already answered it in the way you said that. Can you shed some light on where that comes from? Because when I read that there was a trilogy, I was like, well, I want to see the third film in this Fanatic trilogy. The first two really set up that the third one could be really great. But also, you've also said similar things to me about how you're not producing anymore. And and so what is it with all the people who made all these films that I loved in my generation, who are telling me that they can't or don't want to do this thing that they're obviously good at? And maybe talking about Henry or talking about you or just talking about the state of film, there's something there that I want to dig into.
Well, let's see. Well, first, of course, I can't analyze Henry, and even if I could, I wouldn't, except to say that I think that directing movies is not. Without knowing exactly what Henry meant by what he said, and again, not wanting to analyze him, my perception is that Henry did not find the directing part, and I'm talking about the daily grind of being on set and having to, deal with all the pressures of the day. I'm not sure that he found that as enjoyable as writing. And not that life has to be about everything you enjoy, but I think there's a lot of control when you're writing, and there's a lot less control when you're directing. So I can certainly, while I don't know what Henry is thinking, I can certainly relate to what he might be thinking, which is that films are fun to work on, but the actual day-to-day process of making them is very often very unpleasant, and shockingly so, given how much joy movies in their finished form give everybody. There's the joke about how the most exciting day of your life is your first day on a movie set, and the most boring day of your life is your second day on a movie set.
Yeah.
It's a job, and it comes with pressures and unpleasantries that are, some people can take and some people can't. As for me, making movies is also a business, and while I will take your praise that I was good at that, good at the part of like the movies, as I said, that's fun being on set and giving the writer and director the tools that he or she needs to do their work, and to have success. There's a business side that's going on around that involves, money, and involves distribution, and involves all sorts of things that I don't think I proved to have very much talent at, or didn't have the financial resources to stay in the game long enough to discover whether I had a talent for it. One answer to your question is a movie I made several years after The Believer was a movie called Up With Me. And that's a movie where I actually joined the film in post-production, although I was working with the writer and the director during the production on another project and also advising him. Wonderful, very talented fellow named Greg Takutis. And Up With Me is a movie that was made for very little money and went to South by Southwest and won a big prize there for the cast. And the best offer coming out of South by Southwest for that movie was $5,000 from IFC. I mean, it would have cost $15,000 just to finish the movie. So that IFC could show it. And, I had 3 kids and a mortgage. It was just like, geez, Louise, I can't make a living doing this. And so the people who could make a living doing that either had no overhead, or they had a lot of money and they could afford to not really make money from producing movies. And so for me, that wasn't a great situation. It wasn't financially sustainable, and doesn't feel very good. But also, there was some luck in making The Believer when we did and how we did, because after The Believer won Sundance, lots of people came to me and said, "What do you want to make? We'll fund that." And I would bring scripts to them, and they wouldn't want to make those scripts because they were too weird to them. I was very drawn, not because I think I'm weird, because I'm really not that weird, but I was very drawn to a lot of scripts that I thought were excellent, that I did not know how to get made. No one would seem to give me the money necessary to make those scripts. And some of those movies ended up getting made, and though they weren't very successful, they did get made. So obviously somebody could get them made. And a lot of those scripts just never got made. And I think that was a sign that it wasn't just me, but that I was drawn to scripts that weren't necessarily makeable. And I got a little bit lucky that I got to work early in my career on some films that were both weird and were makeable and did very well artistically and made a great impression on people. And I don't want to say necessarily that it was all luck. I think the harder you work, the luckier you get. But there was a lot of luck involved, and I don't think that luck was going to last. Now, I also know that at one point, Henry did tell me what the third piece in the trilogy was going to be. Ooh. And I'm feeling terrible now that I can't recall it. I'll have to ask him. And maybe he's written it, and maybe he could write it.
Oh, leave us on a cliffhanger.
Yeah. And I think even Henry, intimated that, if the circumstances were right, he would conceivably direct. But he's writing a lot now, and he's got a novel he's working on and television show, and I think he's plenty busy.
Yeah. Everyone's doing okay.
And a movie takes over your life, for several years, and you have to really be willing to focus pretty monomaniacally on that thing. And there's an opportunity cost because you must set aside many other things.
Well, a lot of the time, the place we get to on this "the world is wrong" thing is that even though the world may be wrong about a film is not like someone only getting to make one or two great films is not a tragedy. We got one or two great films. You don't have to make 80 films to be a success in the film business. You need to make one, and not even one great one. But if you make one great one, I feel like that is they can't take that away from. I don't know about you, but they can't take that away from us, the audience.
Well, sure, that's good. Yeah. No, it's thrilling. There's an empty space in the world where an idea does not exist, and then someone like Henry comes along and he fills that empty space with an idea that he took some yeast, from the ether, and he built a thing out of it, and then we all got to work on it, and then suddenly there was a full movie with a complete and interesting and rich idea, a set of ideas in it, and that people still watch and talk about today and care about, and that's a great feeling.
Yeah. And who knows what would have, as you say, Ryan Gosling probably had it when he came in that door and would have had it if you guys hadn't recognized it. But it's part of that trajectory, and it's part of history. So cool. Is there anything that you felt like we wanted to touch on about The Believer that you feel like we didn't get to?
No, I'm just glad that we got a chance to talk about all the other people who worked on it, because of course. I'm
going to cut that out.
There's. Yeah, good. I'm just glad we got. I feel I've done morally the right thing. No, it's look, Henry wrote and directed the thing, and he's the visionary behind it, and Ryan did such a great thing. But I think it's important to remember people like Jim and Susan and Andrew Kim Fajan, who's the line producer, all sorts of people, Susan Hoffman, all sorts of people who did. As I said, a lot of people have to put in a lot of bring their A game, and most of those people don't get remembered and talked about on podcasts, but they all have their fingerprints on everything that's wonderful and funny and delicious and compelling and dramatic about the film.
And that's why people like you should be the producers of these films instead of the people who, just are credit hogs and keep going on up the ladder. Yes. So, yeah, well, you're a mensch.
You're nice to say so.
I didn't ask you about it, but when I was looking at this, the film you did with Craig Bierko and Janine Garofalo, that looks nuts.
Well, it's a short film for Showtime, written and directed by Morgan Jerome Freeman.
Not Morgan Freeman.
No, not the other Morgan Freeman. Yes, Cherry Picker was amusing. It was an amusing little film.
What's it about?
Well, it's about a worker, I believe, played by Janine Garofalo, on a cherry picker, which is a scissor lift, right, like a construction equipment that raises a person high and low, and she appears at his window and sort of stalks him or something like that.
Craig Bierko, I think he's one of my favorite unheralded but very successful actors.
Well, I believe you think The World is Wrong about that Three Stooges movie.
Yes. He was one of the best things in it. He was so good.
Yeah. No, he was extremely funny, and it was just a day of shooting, but he was real fun. They were both very pleasant. They were at the time, I could be wrong about this, I think at the time they were dating. And that is how they came to be cast together in the film. And I do not think that they stayed dating for terribly long after the film was shot.
So the film is like their baby.
It's like Morgan Jerome Freeman's baby, but yes, something like that. So it's like somebody's baby.
Actually, and I should have asked you, if I'm asking you now, we didn't talk about, and this is one thing this is a hazy memory I have when you were visiting me in LA in would have been 1987, 88. No, would have been 88 because I knew Andy Dick at the time. And you went off and filmed something with Ben Stiller on Hollywood Boulevard.
Yes. Well, that's almost correct.
Okay.
So Andy, this was the summer of, I think it was the summer of '89. Although
probably, yeah, that makes sense.
So Andy knew Ben Stiller, and Ben Stiller was doing his variety show or comedy show, like it was in development.
Right. The Ben Stiller show.
The Ben Stiller show, and he wanted Andy to be on it, or Andy wanted to be on it, and so he had to make an audition tape. So Andy and I'm sure this is not how Andy will remember it, but Andy and I actually kind of co-wrote a bunch of comedy bits for him to do. And my idea was for him to be a mime who could not shut up and to go to Grumman's Theater, and he would stand in mime outfit and he would mime, pulling a rope. And then he would say, "It's a rope. Don't you get it? It's a rope." to people who were passing by. And so everything he did, he would get so frustrated that people weren't saying what it was he was doing that he would start telling them what he was doing. He just couldn't stop talking. Anyhow, and I think that's the tape that he sent to Ben Stiller, and I believe that he got the job, right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
That is
never heard boo about it from him.
Yeah, well, I've been friends with him ever since then. Done a lot more, and there's not a lot of boo. But it's sometimes it's just the pleasure of being around someone who makes you laugh that much.
Yes, and then there's Andy. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, yeah. So that's all. Andy had this big ass video camera, and so we would tote it around, and I would just shoot him doing stupid shit around Los Angeles.
Cool. Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. Yeah. I mean, I'm not. I have no.
I remember
I have no complaints about. I have no
time.
complaints about. Oh yeah. No, I have no complaints about it whatsoever.
And this is before Andy was in anything. This is before Andy Dick was in anything. And Ben Stiller, nobody knew who Ben Stiller was at all, except that. Right. I mean, I guess I vaguely remember
that he was the son of Jerry Stiller. Yeah.
Yes, and even then, that's pre-Seinfeld Jerry Stiller. So Stiller and Mira they're like. They weren't like household name celebrities.
Yeah.
Ben Stiller is more of a household name celebrity than they were. So it's just to say that this is we're not talking about, hanging out with the hoi polloi. This is
This is when you and Andy and I were living in Los Angeles, and well, I guess you had done Elm Street, but I mean, basically,
yeah.
That's when
I was the big star. Yeah.
There you go.
I had my moment of, and what did I do with it?
Yes.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. All right. On that note.
Radio 8 Ball.
Andras here. When I'm not co-hosting The World Is Wrong podcast, I'm hosting and producing the Radio 8 Ball podcast, where we answer questions by picking songs at random, like picking musical tarot cards. We've hosted musical divinations for people like John C. Reilly, Patricia Arquette, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen, and hosted over 200 songwriters, providing the randomly chosen answers from Inara George and Dan Byrne to Mose Allison and Alan Toussaint. That's Radio 8 Ball, all one word. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and download our app from the iTunes App Store.
Hi, I'm Brian.
And I'm AJ.
And we have a podcast called The Director's Wall,
examining a filmmaker's career, film by film. First up was M. Night Shyamalan, then Francis Ford Coppola. Who's next? Is there anything to this whole auteur theory? Find out on
The Director's Wall.
Subscribe via Apple Podcasts.